Hi, welcome to Dr. Lisa Solsenti's podcast. I'm Dr. Lisa Solsenti, and I'm just blessed to have you here today. We are talking about MTHFR. We're on this series and we're wrapping it up today, although there's so much more we can talk about, and I will come back to it for sure. But I would like to talk about infertility and MTHFR. I know it's a interesting topic and it could be a little taboo, but it is something that I have clinically seen in the practice over and over again. And as you know, you're probably going to say, oh, it's anecdotal. But you can actually start researching now and seeing the relationship between the MTHFR gene and infertility. They could talk about the DNA stability of it. They talk about the MTHFR. They talk about pregnancy outcome, neural tube defects, and there's just so much with MTHFR and getting pregnant and polymorphisms and with the DNA and just being pregnant and stuff like that. So it is out there. You can do the research yourself if you'd like. But what I want to share with you today is what I guess people would say is anecdotal, but to me it's clinical. I'm going to share with you today what I see in my practice and what has worked. It's as plain as simple. It's just what I'm going to do is just share with you stories and patient stories of what's worked. And I'm not going to go through each story. I'm just going to compile them up and summarize what's working for you. But let's back up for a second. If you don't know what MTHFR is, if this is the first thing, please go back to the first podcast in the series. I talk about what it is. I talk about, the mutations. I talk about the verbiage and the wording that you'll see. If you've had a lab testing done, you can, and you're looking at the wording on the paper, I go through each one of those, what you have, what it stands for. If you haven't had testing, I go over that. So we also talked about some of the chronic illnesses that it's associated with. We talked about my protocol. So I gave you my protocol steps, my 5 steps that you can implement if you have MTHFR. We also talked about MTHFR with mental health, ADD, anxiety, Asperger's, Alzheimer's, stuff like that. We talked about it with liver detoxification. And we also went into leaky gut, which is super important. And we're going to touch on that one again today because it has to do with my fertility. So I want to bring up reproductive health because what I'm seeing in my practice. And it's such great results that I feel like it should get out there. And so people should know about it. So if you know anyone struggling with fertility, let them know about this podcast. Let them know about my work. Okay. All right. So what we see in the practice is what started happening. Let me back up one more sec. Is that I got into leaky gut through my son, who was, I guess, about 4, who was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. And by the time he was in 3rd grade, it was Asperger's. So he was struggled for about 15 years with severe challenges due to autism spectrum disorders, which is what it's called today. And I have a book on it. You could read my book about what we did to help him overcome. It was school was usually his struggles. Today he's 23, going to be 24, yay, and he's doing really well. He's learned a lot, but where we began helping him was through diet, since I have the background, I'm certified in nutrition and dietetics. So that's where we started. And I'm a chiropractor, so we also started with neurology and the brain and the neural pathways and the neurotransmitters and all that stuff. It brings me back into where I'm in today. That launched my leaky gut program because it was helping Luke. We brought it into the practice. And before I even got into the lab testing, because it didn't exist when I started this, so I can't call myself a functional medicine when functional medicine didn't really occur or be. I've seen people say they've been in functional medicine for 25 years. I'm like, okay, but we didn't use that term back then. So what I was doing was I took what I did with Luke into the practice. My husband's like, why don't you just bring your leaky gut, diet? Because at that time it was just a diet. There was no lab testing because it didn't exist. And see what you'll do. And all of a sudden we started helping people with all kinds of illnesses. I didn't even expect it. I mean, I learned through my professors and I learned in my courses that this was going to happen. There's not just a gut-brain connection, there's a gut-body connection. So we knew we could help with neurological issues by repairing the gut, but I didn't realize we could help with thyroid, and I didn't realize I was going to help with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I didn't realize that I was going to help with, Barrett's esophagus and colitis, and which makes sense, right? Because you're fixing the gut. So all the digestive things were going to clear up, right? Those things were obviously a little more obvious, but I was so focused on neurological that, but then I was having things like polycystic ovary syndrome and no periods and diabetes. I've already done. That was my nutrition background before I got into leaky gut, was cardio. But the thing was, thyroid became a big thing, autoimmune. And then the testing came out. So we started doing the testing. So the testing allowed me to bring my leaky gut diet program to an entirely different level. And the reason I'm bringing you this is because infertility was there and it was doing well, but I felt like there was a missing component. I just felt like it wasn't getting... Some girls were getting pregnant, some weren't, and we weren't getting like these wow results, okay? When I started learning about MTHFR, it was more for the Asperger's and the autism. But what I started reading in the research was, oh my gosh, it's related to infertility. And what we realized in the research and in schooling and stuff like that, because I'm always in school, I'm back in school right now, I always keep up with the latest stuff. And what we were learning back then was that if you have the MTHFR genetic mutation, you're more at risk for not being able to convert folic, F-O-L-I-C, acid to the natural folate. And I know I've talked about that. You're like, okay, Dr. Lisa, that's not anything new. Okay, but just hear me out. Think of the equation I talked about. If folic acid's on one side and it has to get converted to the natural folate, and that MTHFR enzyme allows you to do it, great. Then you have enough folate and B12 and B6 and glutathione and all this other stuff, right, that we talked about. Now, if the equation's imbalanced and you don't have that enzyme and you have the MTHFR mutation and you're not converting folic acid to the natural folate, you're going to have that seesaw where the folic acid's really high and the folate's low. So you have a folic acid toxicity and a folate deficiency. And we have found out that a folic acid toxicity creates infertility. And that's where we found the crux of it. This is where that one spot is where I had such results. The other spot I had results was going into the patient's leaky gut and fixing that gut wall dysfunction, fixing the other micronutrient imbalances, which I'll get into in a second, but if you get to the podcast before this, I really went into it. And then the third part was fixing the gut microbiome, which is finding the right probiotic for the patient. Those three things were life-changing. And pretty much, I can't say, they get pregnant. They get pregnant. It just took that, some people were getting pregnant and some people weren't. So they're just getting pregnant. This is great. What we found out was the connection between MTHFR and infertility is too much folic acid. Now, what do they give you when you want to get pregnant in the prenatal? They give you folic acid. When you go to an infertility doctor, so a lot of my patients come to me after they've tried infertility, they're frustrated. And this was years ago. Now I'm getting a lot of girls learning about me and coming to me before they even try to get pregnant, which I have to say, if you're one of those, I think so highly of you. The fact that you are thinking about keeping yourself healthy and being so proactive before you get pregnant is phenomenal. I didn't do that. I didn't even know about that. I didn't even think about that in my 20s. That's phenomenal. So if you're MTHFR or you're like, hey, I'm coming to see Dr. Lisa to see if I'm MTHFR, and I'm going to do all the things that, I need to do based upon my lab testing and working with her to get pregnant and to have a healthy pregnancy and to be the healthiest body I can to put a baby in there. Oh my gosh. So I have you on a pedestal. I just think that's amazing. And I have so many young girls doing that today that's become my practice. So I have a lot of girls preventing it, being proactive, working with me. I went from having all these girls that I could half help to helping a lot to, oh my gosh, let's just go to her before the problems even arise. Amazing. And if you don't have to do fertility drugs, that's so great because you don't know what those hormones are going to do to you later in life. So That's what this functional medicine's about. I always tell people, if you're not doing your follow-ups with me, shame on you, shame on you, because this is about being proactive and preventing things from sneaking up later in life. So let's get back to infertility. So you get a buildup of folic, F-O-L-I-C. My protocol on, I think it's series number 3 podcast, was to avoid it, avoid folic acid at all costs. So if you have MTHFR, no folic acid, none. Now, your medical doctor is going to freak out and say to you, but you can get neural tube defects, you can get these problems. And that's not false. I mean, that's true. But all you have to do is take the natural folate. And today, what some of the girls didn't have in the past was we have prenatals with the methylated folate, with the methylated B vitamins. So it really won't, MTHFR really won't play an effect in that scenario. So that's really one of the things that I do is I get them on the right prenatal. And then if they're with an infertility doctor, we get them on the right folic acid. So even if you want to stick with your infertility doctor, you got to get off folic acid. I'm 53 years old. I have a few friends that we didn't know about MTHFR when, we were in our 20s, and who do not have children. And they are MTHFR, and they took so much folic acid through all their infertility treatments, through all of it, and they look back going, I wish I knew this. I just wish I knew this then. So the other part of it with MTHFR and infertility is also to look at the things that I talked about in all the other podcasts. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I want to talk about infertility, and then I want to break it down for you into steps. So the first step is avoid folic acid at all costs, and then replace the folic acid with the natural folate. And because you're on prenatals or fertility, vitamins, you have to make sure that those have the L5 or the 5L methylfolate. Right? You might see it in different forms. You might see it in 5L methylfolate. You might see it in L methylfolate. You might see it in 5-MTHF. It's just, those are the different forms. And we talked about those in the other podcasts. But you want to make sure you're taking natural folate. And you also can eat natural folate, right? You can get it in the green leafy vegetables. You can get it in your legumes, your beans, and some of the citrus fruits that we talked about in the last few podcasts. So that was the first 2 steps, avoiding it and making sure you're, because it's in foods, it's in your cereals, it's fortified, it's added into foods. Avoid it if you're thinking about infertility. Then the next thing is, so avoid it, read your food labels, read your vitamins, make sure that your vitamins are in the methylated folate and the methylated B12. And that includes the prenatal, that includes the infertility, vitamins, okay? And then get it in natural forms. So that's the breakdown. That's wheelhouse number 1. Wheelhouse number 2 is now we're going to take you to the gut. Because all the girls that I work with, whether they're trying to get pregnant and they're just really amazing in preventing, getting really healthy before, or they're having trouble and they're coming to me, we do the gut. And then you'll hear in my podcast, whatever symptom you have, whatever health crisis you have going on, we go to the gut. And the reason I'm going for the gut is 2 things. The first thing I'm looking at is that gut wall. If that gut wall isn't functioning properly, we have to get it to work. We have to fix that. And what that basically means is there's this thing called zonulin and this thing called actin. Those are proteins in the gut wall. And they control what permeates out of the gut, what leaves the gut. And I talk about this a lot in the podcast before, where it's MTHFR and leaky gut. So please go to that one. And what happens is when the gut wall gets dysfunctional is the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, the amino acids, the omegas, all these things that are very crucial for you to get pregnant, they stop being absorbed. You get other things leaving the gut, like bacteria and toxins and food proteins and just things that are bigger and shouldn't leave, and they take up space and they push the vitamins aside. They push the nutrients aside. So a lot of patients that come to me have a gut wall not working properly and a lot of nutrient deficiencies. So your cells in your body outside the gut. They all need these nutrients. And we've talked about everybody focusing on macros, and I'm going to be the micronutrient person that's going to bring it to the forefront. It's micros. It's all about micronutrients. You eat carbs, fats, and proteins, so you get vitamins, minerals, nutrients, antioxidants, phytonutrients, omegas, amino acids, all the micronutrients, coenzyme Q10, all of them. Zinc, selenium, B's, A's, all of that. You're eating those macros to get the micros. The micros are getting broken down, and it should be absorbed in the bloodstream. But when they're not being absorbed, the cells aren't getting what they need to function properly. So a lot of dysfunctions in the body come from the gut wall dysfunction, and they lead to cell dysfunction. So that's what you have to really understand. If we fix the gut dysfunction, the cells won't dysfunction. Okay, that's first part of this wheelhouse. The second part of this wheelhouse is what's called the gut microbiome, which I went into in depth in the podcast before this. But this is what I do. This is my protocol for infertility, is then I have to make sure that there's no pests in there, there's no yeast overgrowth, there's no bacterial overgrowth, we don't have too much strep or too much staph. I don't want parasites. You don't even want that stuff if you're going to get pregnant. It's not a good terrain or environment for a baby. So we want to fix that and make sure they get on the right probiotic. So that's another thing you don't want to do when you're pregnant, is just take a random probiotic. We want to find out which one is specifically the right one for your gut imbalance. And we fix that. So we fix the gut wall, we fix the gut imbalance, we fix the folic acid problem, and we start making the third wheelhouse change, which is I want to make sure that the liver's working properly and she's detoxifying correctly, and looking at her lifestyle too. Like, where else in her life could we make some healthy changes? So there's just things that, like if you're microwaving plastics all the time, we're going to take out that. If you're walking around with water bottles like Poland Springs or those water bottles, we're going to change that. If you're eating a lot of fast foods, we're going to change that. So that is how we work with MTHFR and infertility, is those wheelhouses all beautifully put together. And I have to share it with you because it works in my practice. It really works very well. And whether that's scientifically going to be challenged, I don't know, but I feel like, why would I not share with you what I clinically see in my practice, what I do with patients, and what works versus what doesn't work. And again, I went back to you telling you when I began with this, half the people would get pregnant and half wouldn't. So it was working, but it wasn't completely working. And that's what a practice is. That's what functional is. And that's why I yell at people who do not follow up with me, because even in my practice, being your functional medicine practitioner that you chose, it's a process. It's a journey, right? What I knew back then, 20 years ago, is so different from today. And it's by working with patients, and the technology got better, the testing got better, and now we know what works. And I bet you in 5 years, or maybe even 2 or 3, it'll be like, oh my gosh, there's this other wheelhouse we want to add that's so phenomenal and it works. So that's what's beautiful about functional medicine, is that we are always getting together. I'm always in school. I'm always taking courses, and we're always challenging ourselves to how else can we help a patient. So I hope you really enjoyed this podcast. It's a big secret that I've been wanting to address for so long. And again, it doesn't replace your medical doctors or your medical care. I'm not treating you on a podcast. So please know that. And if you ever want to meet with me, there's go to my website, book a consultation. If you're a patient, book the follow-up. If you haven't done a follow-up on me, shame on you, and get more proactive, because you want to prevent things from happening. No matter what stage you're at, stuff happens. Okay, so have a blessed day, and thank you for today.